Excited to be joined now by Tony Campbell, who's Chief Executive of the Motorcycle Industry Association. Tony, thank you for joining us today. So we've seen these tariffs being announced by President Trump. What are the implications for the UK motorcycle industry on particularly the British brands' exports?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say that it's incredibly disappointing. We actually were included in the steel and aluminium tariffs that were announced a few weeks back. And as it stands at the moment, with the announcement on automotive, that obviously directly affects the whole car in our sector. They haven't separated out motorcycles per se, but the tariff level is still 25%. So without getting too technical, that 25% will apply to any of the components and products within a motorbike that are either steel or aluminium. So you would probably on average say that at least 85 to 90% of the content is actually steel or aluminium. So whilst we're not quite going to be blanket 25, it's really not far off. But what it has done, it's going to bring a massive administrative burden for those companies to separate out the content value of the steel and aluminium. And some, I am sure, will simply just have to take the 25% on the chin and just manage it as a block, because actually the cost to separate the content out and pay the 25% only on the steel and aluminium will probably be the administrative cost will be greater than just saying, we'll just declare the whole vehicle for the sake of it. So not good news. And without question, in a challenging economic environment that we're all aware of, this is certainly not, where the industry needs to be. I think in terms of where I can understand some of the motivations from the Trump administration and some of their end goals. I think what they've misunderstood is the complexity of supply chain. And this is where, the world's moved on so much. It used to be quite binary. Something would be made, if it said made in America or made in Britain, it meant it was made in Britain. Over the last 25, 30, 40 years, supply chains have become far more disparate, parts coming from all over the world, specializations in different places around the world. So whilst you have a British brand, as an example in Triumph, some of the content will be British sourced. The majority is from around the globe. And therefore, I think the Trump administration has really misunderstood. Clearly, they're disrupting, and this is their end goal. It's to disrupt, it's to get people back to the table. They've got this idea that, they're being, I think I'll use their language, raped and pillaged. And that's certainly not the case in our view. So it's disappointing for somebody like Triumph, other brands, less so at the moment, but Norton and other British brands that do good business in the US. This really is the blow, and therefore going to affect their competitivity. Yeah.
And what advice are you giving to your members?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, it is such a complex situation. So the advice we're giving to our members is clearly we are representing them with the Department for Business and Trade, trying to make the arguments or establish the arguments. What we're suggesting to them is that they have to work really closely with their customs and freight forwarders, the real experts in this. So number one, get the paperwork right. Number two is understand, there was a belief that if tariffs were imposed purely on the UK, you could circumnavigate them depending on where you were producing vehicles. And the reality is that's not the case. So, the reality is, Trump wants to bring manufacturing home. He wants to establish manufacturing. He's saying to companies, come and produce here. We'll give you favorable terms. We need to employ American people. We need to produce goods here. Whether it's a t-shirt or a car, and what he's trying to do. And I guess he must appreciate that we have a global production base now. They want more of it in the US, and these measures are trying to force people to do that.
Are we going to see Triumph in Texas?
I I don't know. I think you'd have to ask them. I think Triumph, interesting as a business, is grown enormously, and people's perception of Triumph, in its heydays in the 60s, actually used to sell between 50 and 60,000 units a year. Today's Triumph is selling 130,000 new products a year. The scale is double what it was when Triumph was in its heyday. Um, I would not be, I mean, Triumph have got a footprint, in different places around the globe. Will they see the US as a potential, place to invest and set up? As I say, I think you'd have to ask them. And I
Yeah.
guess at the moment, the behavior we're seeing with the Trump administration, one day it's daytime, the next moment it's nighttime. And with each of these periods, things are changing. It's impossible for any industry, particularly an industry that has long lead times, to do any sort of planning at the moment and consideration about what the landscape's going to look like in the future.
And last question, what does this mean for the great British motorcycle enthusiast?
Well, from a British customer perspective, I think, well, first and foremost, we know the EU have already reacted to the steel and aluminium tariffs, which is having a big impact on Harley Davidson products coming into the EU space. In terms of the British customer, the biggest fear for me is what negative impact does it have on the market in general terms? These tariffs, because put the tariffs to one side for a moment. At the moment, there's no tariffs that have been retaliatory from the UK government perspective. So as it stands at the moment, if you are buying or consuming US goods, in this case, say Harley Davidson motorcycles, relatively speaking, coming into the UK under the MFN tariff rules, not into the EU. And then, of course, you then have to understand the rules of origin, and the rules of origin are a very complex environment. So we know that some brands have been, it's no secret. Some brands have been struggling. The market's been challenging. As a British consumer, I guess arguably am I going to have the choice that I had before? Am I going to pay more money than I've had to pay before? If companies aren't achieving their, global volumes that they want, then to survive, you have to consider putting prices up. And what's going on with the US and whatever, we mustn't believe, it's okay. I mean, I saw some stuff on the news yesterday about great news. We only got 10%, the EU got 20%. Yeah, please don't be foolish to think that 20 will not impact on the UK consumer, because it absolutely will. So I think we just got to be hopeful. We know the government are working hard to establish a trade arrangement with the US. The only reason why we only got 10% was because the trade deficit is negligible between the two countries. He applied some formula, and the formula was where there's pretty much a trade deficit, where there's a balance of trade, then what we will do is we'll just reciprocate on a similar basis as to what the US pay. It's not because of any special relationship. It's not because he loves Britain. It is purely because he's taken this rule and he's applied it wherever. And you'll see other countries that have only got 10%.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see politically how this impacts the relationship between the UK and the EU. Only time will tell.
Tony, thank you very much for your time today.
No problem. Thank you, Justin.